So I love genealogy. I know a lot about my family history. And one of the things that I love to tell people is that my great great grandmother saw the shootout at the OK Corral.
What?
How
Yes,
awesome is
and she
that?
was like 12 or 13.
Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Now, today, we are joined by Lisa, the host of History USA on YouTube and Instagram. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're very, very happy to have you with us. So before we get into introducing Lisa, I want to ask anybody who watches the live stream now or later, or who's listening to the podcast, to give us a review, share the video, and help us grow, because really you guys are the ones who are going to help us grow. And we're trying to beat the History Channel.
That's right.
Because the History Channel, you know, they
don't talk about history.
They don't talk about history. So we talk about nothing but history on the Talk with History podcast. So give us a shout out and help us grow. Now, Lisa, as I said earlier, she's the host of History USA on YouTube and Instagram, and she has a passion for history and genealogy. And she's a fan of searching archives, visiting old plantations, battlefields, or really any historical gems found in Southeast America right now. We're so happy to have her with us tonight. So how are you doing, Lisa?
I'm doing good. It's historical USA.
That's right. Thank you.
So
Thank you for the
just
correction.
to clarify that, if you're
Historical.
looking for History USA, you might find somebody else. Yes, I do love that. We were in Charleston for quite a long time, and I just absolutely fell in love with the history there, and just it is one of the most historical places in the country.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the Southeast, but we are now up in the DC area. We just moved up here a few months ago, so now I'm having a ball just
Sure.
exploring all the historical places around DC, Maryland, Virginia area. It's like another. You couldn't have put me in two better places. You start me off in Charleston, and then you move me up to DC, and I mean, it is like a historian's paradise up here. Seriously.
Yeah, you were not lacking for anything to do on the weekend up there in the greater DC area. Like there's something
So much
everywhere. I mean, we drive from Norfolk all the way up to DC every once in a while just to go do the history stuff up there. So we're jealous.
Oh, and I mean, and I can go see things over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I could go walk the National Mall every day and be just awed by how beautiful it is and just all the history there. And we do have we've scheduled some trips. I've dragged my family along to some places
Nice, very nice.
that they wouldn't have known about or heard about, and I'm like, we got to go there, and I get to play tour guide with them, so it's been a lot of fun.
Good. So tell us a little bit about your background, maybe a little bit of like where you're from and kind of how you became like a fan of history and how that eventually grew into the Instagram channel and YouTube channel.
I mean, I think it's always been in my DNA. I grew up in Gilbert, Arizona,
Okay.
which is outside of Phoenix, and I think the first time that I can remember, and especially my mother will tell you that she knew that like this was going to be a passion of her daughter's, was I was in the third grade, so I was like 9 years old, my son's age, which is crazy. And I asked her if I could stay up on a Sunday night during a school night so I could watch A House Divided by a documentary the American Experience had put on PBS
Oh my
about
That's great.
Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln and kind of the dichotomy that was going on within their family. And the funny thing was, it wasn't like, okay, I wanted to stay up and watch this. I stayed up and I took notes.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
what 9-year-old
9
takes
years old.
notes? And so I took notes, and the funny thing was, those notes like stayed in our family room like for years. Like they just stayed in the family room for years. And I remember I wrote them on like graphing paper, just whatever I could find. It was like I was
Yeah.
watching the documentary and I was like, I gotta write this down. And I just started writing notes and I kept the notes. And I remember my three older brothers were like, what is wrong with you? Like, what is wrong with you?
That's too funny.
But I had a lot of like historical influences in my life too. My two older brothers who really aren't into history as much anymore, but they had a huge love and fascination with the Civil War as teenage boys, and they're a little older than me. And so this is, before iPhones, before smartphones, and
Yes.
you go in the bathroom and you have like a pile of magazines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Encyclopedia.
my brother, my brother would leave like young adult Civil War books and Revolutionary War books in the bathroom. And so he would leave like his favorite one was Rifles for Wadey. And so Rifles for Wadey, if you've ever read that book, if you've ever heard of it, I've tried to find it in a few bookstores and stuff, and I can't find it. But he would leave Rifles for Wadey in the bathroom, and I just remember like I would pick it up and read it
I'll be
That's
on the
whenever
awesome.
lookout
I
for
was in
it.
there for any length of
I'm gonna be
time.
looking for rifles for Wadey now.
Yeah. We'll have to
Yeah,
go look at the
so
Army Navy store.
yeah, and so just really early on, I just had a love for it, and I also am kind of a little bit of a know-it-all, and I like to know how things work and why things are the way that they are, and history is will tell you all of that.
Yeah. So
It'll get down to the brass tacks of all
how
that.
did
Yeah.
that eventually translate that? Like, kind of what prompted you to start up, some of the social media channels? Because in various spots, you've got a fair amount of followers.
Yeah, social media has been a wild ride, I think, for anybody that does social media.
Yeah.
You have like some serious ups and lows. But really, the reason why I started it was we had started a family, moved across country. I had just had my daughter. My daughter was starting to get to an age where she didn't need me as much. I mean, she needs me, but
Right.
you get out of a certain stage and
Mhm.
they're a little more independent and you're a little more free to do what you want to do. We were in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was actually sitting on the beach. I remember it was right around the 4th of July, and I was scrolling through Facebook, and someone had posted a picture of a little monument that said, and I'm sure you've probably seen it, but it says like 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. Like
Yeah.
two of them have died, and two of them had lost sons, and they had lost all their fortune and everything. And here I am living in Charleston, South Carolina,
Yeah.
which is not only, one of the original 13 colonies, which was something I had never experienced being out in the Southwest. There's just so much history there. And I went, I don't know any of these men. I could not, as someone who was into history and took history classes, I realized I could not tell you maybe more than 10 of the signers of the Declaration of
Yeah.
Independence, and there was 56 signers, and that kind of hit me a little hard. And I went, I don't know who these people are, and let's kind of start to figure out. So if you go all the way back to my like very very beginning, the first couple posts, it's all about the signers and
Yeah.
just getting their names out there, finding quotes, and I think my research skills have come quite a long way. So just kind of digging in and finding out who these people are. As I started doing that, I went, I am going to I'm going to start a history page. I'm going to call it Historical USA. And we're going to start with the founding era and the Revolutionary War. And I thought for sure by the next year I'd get to the Civil War. And then I thought, and I started to realize very quickly that I could just stay in the Revolutionary War
Yeah.
forever
Yeah.
and never know everything that there was to know about it. That I could, uncover people and you start falling down rabbit holes. And that's kind of where I went with my page for a really long time. I just would research someone and then another person would pop up, like Mercy Otis Warren, that I was like, whoa, she is so cool, and her nickname is the Muse of the American Revolution, and
Huh.
not a lot of people know about her. I think there's one statue in Massachusetts that the Daughters of the American Revolution had putting up about her, and she wrote an entire history of the American Revolution and shared that and got firsthand letters and documentation of some of our founding fathers. She was really close friends with Thomas Jefferson and
That's cool.
John Adams, Sam Adams. I think she gets a little buried because she was an anti-federalist, and she kind of took part in that war of words between the anti-federalists and the federalists publicly, along with like Sam Adams and some of the other anti-federalists. And I think that kind of damaged her a little bit in history. But when I uncovered her, I went, wow, like I could really relate to her. She's a female historian, and she is doing it in real time. And I just really gravitated towards her. And I wanted to find more people like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to find more people that were buried in the annals of history and try to bring them up a little bit.
Well, it seems like
And
you're
so,
working backwards because you're doing the Mayflower right now. You're doing all the
I
people.
know.
So you're like, I'm going to do the American Revolution and get to the Civil War. Oh, wait, I'm going to go backwards.
I know. And see, that's the thing. I realized very quickly, I didn't want my page is for me.
Yeah.
Like this is my hobby. Like
Absolutely.
I have to have a goal, but at the same time I want to do what's interesting at this the
Sure.
same time. Like, and you'll
Yeah.
see me like go off on a little bit. Like I had a little period where I was really fascinated with the Titanic. And so I posted a lot of Titanic interviews, and I did a lot of things about the Titanic. I think I did a whole YouTube video on the Californian. And so like, you'll see me do that a little bit. And and it's funny because I was in college. I was in college while I was doing the beginnings of my page, and I was taking like the classics, Roman history, and I did like a whole swath of just posts on emperors and philosophers and just kind of things that interest me. But it's kind of always at its core has always been the founding fathers and American Revolution.
Sure.
And for right now, I mean, I'll get to the Civil War one day, and you'll see Civil War. You'll see Civil War posts too, because
appreciate
it's like
the Mayflower. I like it. I like what you said. Do it what interests you, because I think the passion comes across then.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, that's kind of how we've done our channel, because there's a lot of channels, on YouTube where they focus on World War II or their reaction style videos or Civil War, something like that. And they're all well and good, but for us, I'd say we're a lot more of a variety.
Yeah, we go all over.
We're kind of,
we do all the time.
we had, Jen got to go to England, so we did a bunch of English stuff, and then we're doing the Army Navy store that's down the street because we thought that was really cool. And then there's some other, we're just kind of hitting a little bit of everything. And,
so we understand.
To your same point, we see the trends of what tends to be popular videos for folks who are visiting our channel so far. But even within those, there's people who like our Emmett Till, kind of more civil rights era type stuff, and then all our Arlington stuff. Yes. So even within there's subsets. Yeah. So you can fall down those rabbit holes, and there's plenty of other people that are interested in those rabbit holes just like you.
Yeah, and it's I kind of feel like with history, especially with historians, they want to learn about other history too.
Yeah.
I have not met one of those like niche, World War I, World War II. I have a lot of World War I, World War II pages that follow my stuff and will share because, history is, you genuinely want to learn, I think, when you're a history buff. So I don't, and my page is Historical USA for a reason. I didn't keep it like Penman of the Revolution because I wanted to have it where I could go wherever I wanted to go.
Sure.
I just kind of felt like at the time that I started doing this, I really, really wanted to get our founding fathers' names out there and to really kind of get people to understand who these men were, and that it was so much more than kind of what we've been presented.
Yeah. Well, there's we're gonna jump on to the next segment here, and this is kind of if you haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast yet, because like other aspects of social media, podcasts are difficult to grow. So we don't have a ton of folks that are listening just yet, but we like to do something that's called a history word association game. So
don't get scared. It's just fun.
It's really
Okay.
all this is just, I'll kind of think of a topic and then I'll kind of try to pick some words to see mostly kind of how each of us think, right? And a little secret about this podcast, it's more of a people podcast than it is a history podcast, even though history is kind of the avenue for us to chit chat. So you just kind of, I'll give you a word and you can say the first word or phrase that pops into your head.
Okay.
So if I was to say Kansas, what would you think?
Topeka, Kansas.
Okay. All right. That's fine. If I was to say Solo, what's the first thing that would come to mind?
Han Solo.
Okay.
That's what I said.
Yeah, that's what Jen said too. All right. If I was to say Equal Rights Amendment, what would you think?
Equal Rights Amendment. Honestly, 13th comes to mind, like the 13th Amendment.
Okay. All right. If I was to say Ticker Tape Parade, what would you think?
The first thing that popped into my mind was the fanfare, the old, this might be the old archive footage of Pershing coming into New York after World
sure.
War One.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, if I was to say transatlantic, what would you think?
Amelia Earhart.
Yep.
So that is the subject that I am driving towards.
I was the same way.
Yeah, you hit almost the
I
same things
love
that Jen hit.
Amelia
He
Earhart.
said Kansas. I said Dorothy. He said Solo. I said Hans. He said Equal Rights Amendment. I was like 19th.
Yeah.
I was like never passed. And he goes Ticker. He said Ticker. He didn't. I don't think he did Ticker Tape Parade.
No,
we
he
added
didn't.
that one. But he said Transatlantic. I said Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
So I was the same way.
Yeah. So
We wanted to add one, so we added Ticker Tape because when she came back.
yeah. So all of those words were kind of leading up to Amelia Earhart. So she was actually born in Kansas, right? She was known for some of her more famous solo flights. The Equal Rights Amendment, she was a big proponent of the Equal Rights Amendment for women's rights and things like that. The Ticker Tape Parade, so she received a Ticker Tape Parade when she did that transatlantic flight in July of 1928. This is kind of stuff I think of the topic and then I go search for the words. So all of that, leads up into it. And what we like to ask is, what do you remember learning about either in your youth or what stands out to you now about Amelia Earhart? Because I think it's always interesting to kind of talk about how we learn certain relatively famous historical figures.
It's funny you say that. I just watched a documentary on Amelia Earhart
Cool.
on Nova, on PBS Nova. They did a documentary because they think they had found her bones.
Yeah.
So they're trying
cool.
to figure out if these were actually her bones or not. So I do know quite a bit about Amelia Earhart. I do know one fun fact about Amelia Earhart. She hated her freckles.
Oh, really?
And and so when they were trying to find out if her body was what was the body that they think it was, they had found all these glass bottles in this, because they believe what had happened was that her plane had gone down, and they think that her and her co-pilot were stranded on a desert island. And they think that she had and her co-pilot, I can't remember his name, but they had survived for quite a while on the island before they had succumbed to death. What they are alleging that they believe. But they had found these bodies, and next to them were these glass vials. And she hated her freckles. And so what she would do is she would apply a mercury concoction to her skin to try and minimize her freckles. And the mercury was kept in these glass bottles. And so they tested the bottles to see if it could have been her cosmetics. I mean, it is the early 20th century, and they did stuff like that. But so that was one of the things that they used to see if that these might have been her and her co-pilot's remains.
How interesting.
Which I found really fascinating. Really, really fascinating.
That is fascinating. It's kind of a little stretchy, right? You just crash landed and you're on an island. I think the last thing I'd be concerned about is my freckles.
Well, I mean, she might have had the files with her. Right?
Yeah, I think it might have been more like she grabbed the bag and they were in there.
Yeah.
But
It's like the one thing.
but I've heard all the concerity theories about
Sure.
Amelia Earhart. That she was actually captured and assimilated into certain cultures, and but it is a fun mystery and kind of a fun story, a tragic story, but also kind of a fun story to take a look at. And she lived a really incredible life.
She did.
I mean, she is definitely a woman that did not take no for an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I can totally respect that. She was in very much a man's world.
Yeah, especially at that time.
Trying to do, something that, I mean, had a lot of risk involved. And she trained a lot for it. I know she did train quite a bit, and I think she trained in California for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well,
So,
and to your point too, when I was kind of looking up, different things about her, I mean, she had like tried multiple times to go to some like very high quality colleges. I think she had plans at one point to try to go to MIT, right? Just wasn't able to make certain things happen, but eventually found her way, into doing something that's like incredibly historic.
Yeah.
There was a picture of her walking with the president,
Absolutely.
with Herbert Hoover. It was, you talk about someone who found her way. And like you said, she didn't take no for an answer and made her mark on history, which I think she was going to do. She's one of those characters that probably would have done it one way or another.
Sure. She was trying to make it to Howland Island. So every time we would be in the Navy out there, I'd always be like, Howland Island, where is it at? I mean, it's crazy. That was the most dangerous part of the whole trip. Because here she's trying to make it to this small island with a small airstrip at the end of her fuel.
Was this from like...
She's flying from Asia. She's going to hit Howland, and then she'd probably hit Hawaii, and then probably hit back to America. This is the end of her trip.
Oh, she crashed at the end of her trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the last part.
Oh, wow.
And she didn't make it to Howland Island.
They did search for her. They send out quite a search party for her, and there is some archive footage of that you could see. I think because I know that
the Navy searched.
The Navy was involved in that. Yeah,
FDR.
It was quite an effort.
They definitely put out a search for her.
Yeah, but again, it's just one of those things that I thought was interesting, and I like to kind of ask the question and kind of see what people know, see what they don't know, see what they learned. Like all I remember learning about Amelia Earhart growing up was, one of the first kind of women to do these incredible flights.
Yeah. I mean, she did a bunch of, she pushed the envelope in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
She's wearing pants all the time, right? I think when I read her book as a kid, because I loved her as a child, her mom made her pants. Like she didn't want to wear dresses as a little girl.
Oh, I know.
She made her like bloomers, like bigger pants. And then she cut her hair short.
Okay.
Right. So you always think of Amelia Earhart with the short hair.
Yep.
Now, if the roaring 20s and 30s, not that big of a deal, but she always had her hair short. So that's kind of still pushing that social norm.
Yeah. Moving on from that, what's one of the things I like to ask folks is what they remember from their youth of like the first big historic event that either happened to you or that you remember, whether it's local, it happened in your family, or national, global. Like what's the first big kind of historical event that you remember?
Like that I knew history was being made in this moment.
Sure.
Well, for me, that's obviously 9/11.
Okay.
That's going to be something that is seared into my brain forever. But the funny thing is about that, or the most ironic thing in my life about 9/11 was my grandparents were visiting in a few months before that. So they were visiting right before we started school.
Yeah.
And my grandmother looked at me. They were talking about Pearl Harbor and, when they were kids, how that impacted them. And my grandmother grew up on a Navy base. Her father was a Marine. And so she just remembers when Pearl Harbor happened, that she'll remember where she was for the rest of her life.
Oh, wow.
What happened that day and the feeling in the country. And I remember she looked over at me And they were also kind of talking about like the Oklahoma bombing,
Yep.
which I do remember a little bit, but I was 5 years old. So I do remember like my mom watching the news about it, but I don't really remember like grasping what was happening. But I do remember when my grandmother and my mom were kind of talking about, those events in history that you'll remember where you are forever. And my
Yeah.
grandma talked about Pearl Harbor and the Kennedy
Yeah.
assassination and
That's
things. And
another
I
big
do
one.
remember her looking over at me at like 12 years old. She went, "Huh, I wonder what's going to happen in your little life, that you'll remember where you were." And like a month later, 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And it's like I can remember like the events of that day so clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I do, and like I was a weird child, so I do remember watching, Congress and all the
Mm-hmm.
congressional hearings and everything going on. I remember them voting on the Patriot Act, and so I very much realized in that moment that, the world was going to change forever,
Yeah.
and I wanted to know and kind of understand what that change was going to look like, even
Yeah.
at a young age. So, um, my dad was very much involved in politics at that time too, and so yeah, like he would have C-SPAN on
Yeah.
if especially while all of that was going on to see what Congress was doing, and I do remember watching some of those hearings with him and kind of trying to get a grasp about what was going on. But we did watch and I remember my brothers and I, not so much my sister, which is really funny. She has a totally different, she's a few years younger than me, and she has a completely different understanding of 9/11 than I do, just from being
Really?
3 years younger.
Huh.
And um, so it is kind of interesting, but I do 9/11 for sure. That
Yeah.
for sure is going to be like probably one of the hopefully only big events
So do you
like that.
remember, so you mentioned your grandma, right? A month prior saying, talking about, either Pearl Harbor, JFK assassination, things like that. Like, do you remember some of the things that she said? Like, does she remember where she was and what she did, whether it was, Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor. I mean, I'm kind of curious, right? I didn't get a chance to talk to my grandparents as much, when I was younger. Do you remember any of the things that she
Yeah.
said, like what she remembered?
So yeah, actually, this summer I went back to Phoenix. They're now pushing 90. So
Yeah.
my grandfather just turned 89, and my grandmother is 88 years old. And when I went back to Arizona, I did go back with the sole purpose to interview them on camera
Oh, good.
and to ask them those questions. And my grandfather, I have posted some videos of them from those interviews. Like my
Yeah.
grandmother met Elvis.
I saw that
And
one.
so I posted that,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
you can see my grandpa is kind of sitting there with his, it's not a big deal,
Yeah.
kind of like, and that's just how he is. It's like pulling teeth trying to get emotion out of him, unless you're talking about the stock market. But with my grandmother, she was like 7 years old, and she does remember that it was very scary. And growing up on a Navy base,
Yeah.
the type of activity that would be happening around where they were was very scary. And she said it was a very, very scary feeling. But she also talked a lot about um, VJ Day.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they were in San Diego, and she was old enough that her mother left her younger brothers at home and took her and her oldest brother Danny to downtown San Diego.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
I looked up some archival footage of what was going on at downtown San Diego, and I showed it to her, and because there was this one car of this, and my grandmother's got this reddish strawberry blonde hair, and she dyes it now, but that was kind of the color back then, her natural color. And there is this one convertible car that looks just like the car that she had described her mother driving, with these two little kids in the back seat. And it was a son and a daughter, a brother and a sister, And I was like, oh my gosh, what if that's my grandmother?
Oh, how
But
cool.
I mean, it's too grainy to like, oh yeah, that's for sure. But
Sure.
I mean, I could just imagine her in that crowd. There's
That's
like
really neat.
sailors everywhere, and she remembers how the joy from like being in that crowd, and that's the stuff she wants to remember.
That's
and so
awesome.
that's what she wanted to talk about was
That's
VE
really
Day
cool.
and VJ Day, and how San Diego was like bustling, and
Yeah.
everyone was out on the street just celebrating, and people were throwing confetti in the air. It was just a wild party, and I loved that story. That was my favorite story of that she told.
That's a really cool one. I mean, I would say for me, and that's why I was very curious to hear, what you were, what you got to talk to your grandparents about. The only thing I think for my grandparents, I remember when I was pretty young. So my grandfather, gosh, he passed away, quite a few years ago now, but he was born in the early 1900s, like 1915-ish or something like that, 18. But I remember him as a kid, right? You always, kids a lot of times, we get that assignment like, hey, interview your grandparents about something that they remember. And I remember him telling me about living through the Great Depression and where he lived and taught, like he told me about making like, basically like tomato soup out of like ketchup.
Yeah.
Right. And like literally like sewing clothes with like potato sacks and stuff like that. Flour sacks. Like he remembers that as a kid. And that's one of those things. And that's why I was curious to hear about your grandparents' experience.
I love that.
And that's always stuck out in my mind. And I was probably like maybe 7 or 8. I don't remember too much more. I don't remember what the report is about. It was probably about the Great Depression.
Yeah. Or your grandparents.
But yeah, so I remember interviewing my grandpa. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember this, that, and the other." And
Lisa, I just love that story so much because we met in San Diego.
Yeah,
we got married in San Diego. We got married at the base on 32nd Street.
Yeah,
we got married at that Navy base.
Yeah, that little chapel.
The little chapel there.
Yeah,
and we had we had a reception at North Island on the base. So I just love to hear that San Diego was such a Navy town through all of that. That's really awesome, Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, my grandpa, he doesn't talk much, and it's really hard to kind of get stuff out of him. I really wanted to try to interview him about Pearl Harbor because he wasn't there in San Diego. He was in Zap, North Dakota, but he doesn't remember a thing about Pearl Harbor.
Oh, really?
Like, no one talked about it with him, none of that.
Really?
But he's one of those family that kind of were affected a little bit by the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for a long time, his father had died when he was about 7.
Mm.
And for a long time, I didn't know, nobody talked about why he died or anything. And just from doing the interviews and kind of talking to them and trying to get their story, I found out that he had killed himself.
Oh, wow.
And so I was asking my grandpa, like, okay, grandpa, tell me, what do you remember about your dad? And he says he doesn't remember anything. And I knew he grew up in a farming town. So I asked him, I said, Grandpa, like, was it the Great Depression? Was this what happened? And he said, no. What happened was he and his sisters believed, from what his mother told him, that his father was given a terminal cancer diagnosis
Oh, wow.
by the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of having his family watch him kind of waste away, he just decided to kind of end it all. But in doing that, Pearl Harbor happens about 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah.
And my grandmother, my great grandmother, his mother, who is now a single mother, single woman, was able to get a job on the Navy Yard,
Awesome.
working on the B-52s, and she was a Rosie.
Yeah,
Oh
Rosie
my
Riveter.
gosh.
And
Riveter.
Rosie the Riveter. And I asked my grandpa, I was like, Grandpa, do you know how iconic that is? And he's like, and it's funny because he's just like, well, she worked crazy hours and she was on shift work, and I didn't really understand what was going on. And now the Rosies have kind of become like this, icon for female empowerment.
It's literally the podcast cover art for this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Definitely
he
on my
just
shirt.
kind of downplayed it my whole life. And I was like, Grandpa, like, do you not understand how big of a deal this is? That my great grandmother,
Yeah.
was working on these airplanes during World War II. And he's just like, well, it's just her job. That was her job. That's just what she
It's
did.
so
And to
interesting how
him, it was just kind of like,
humble. They're just humble too. It's how the
Yeah.
life was. It's the way it was. It's what we had to do. I mean,
yeah,
we see it as so iconic. They see it as survival. You come from strong women, Lisa. I mean, that's a lot for her to move her family and then
Yeah.
work, right?
Yeah.
To work.
Where was she living? Like what Navy base was that?
Was it San Diego too?
So it was the same Navy base. Actually, so when they moved on, they moved, I think, down the street from my grandmother.
Okay.
And so at that time, my grandpa was about
So that's how they met.
12. Yeah. So when my grandmother got there, so my grandfather was born in Zap, North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And they moved and lived with the family for about a year. And then she was able to get housing on the Navy Yard, in the
Yes.
naval base.
Yep.
And met my grandmother. And actually, he took one look at my grandmother and said, "That's the woman I'm going to marry."
Oh my God.
And and they've had like this 1950s like quintessential
Yeah.
like love story ever since.
Yeah.
It's just been
That's great.
and they got married at Balboa Park.
Okay.
Oh, we know
There's like a
Balboa
chapel
Park.
there.
Yeah, we know
Yep.
Balboa.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's where they got married in 1954. In
Wow.
1954.
Yeah,
I
how
think.
crazy.
That's
So,
awesome.
family working on Navy bases in San Diego area, and then
It's amazing.
getting married there. Not too much
Yep.
longer.
And he
San Diego
joined the
is
Air
a
Force, and
Navy
he
town. Yep.
yeah, it is a Navy town, and he joined the Air Force and went to Albuquerque, New Mexico
Mhm.
during the Korean War.
Okay.
Took my grandma. My grandma loved it. My grandma loved being a military spouse.
Yeah.
It's so funny that because she always, every time she calls me, she goes, "I bet you're loving this life." And I'm like,
You're like,
there are days.
You're like,
But she loved being a military spouse. But when they got back, he went to San Diego and worked for Goodyear Tire
Yeah.
till he retired. And it was funny because I had posted a video about the Artemis space launch.
Mhm.
And someone went, talking about how we're going to go back to the moon. And someone goes, "Well, we never went there in the first place."
Oh.
And I started chuckling to myself because my grandpa's a very, very, he doesn't talk much. There's not a lot you can get him riled up about. But if you mention that the moon landing never happened, he goes crazy.
Yeah.
He goes, "I know for a fact it happened because I saw the tires on the rover." And so he gets really passionate about that because he saw those tires working for Goodyear for as long
cool.
as he did.
That's
It's
awesome.
just
That's
kinda funny.
awesome.
Well,
Yeah,
very-
he's a good he is so funny to me because he's just so quiet and calm,
Yeah.
and then you can get him on these things.
Makes sense.
So I think that's actually a good segue. So one of the last questions that I like to ask is some regional history. Whether it's from where you grew up, and obviously now that you're in the Navy life, moving every couple years, you're learning all the regional history. But I like to ask folks, especially maybe more where they grew up, is what's some regional history that you knew about that if I was to go visit, the area where you grew up, that I wouldn't know about.
Yeah, that you wanted to show us.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier my one of my biggest hobbies is genealogy.
Mhm.
Yep.
So I love genealogy. I know a lot about my family history, and one of the things that I love to tell people is that my great great grandmother saw the shootout at the OK Corral.
What?
How awesome!
And yes,
is
and she
that?
was like 12 or 13.
She's
Her
just
father
chilling?
was working. Well, her father worked for the silver mines. So Tombstone is a big mining town, and it's a boom town. And so there was a silver mine there, and he was a silver miner working for the silver mines. And I mean, I think Tombstone's an awesome town.
Mhm.
It is so fun. They have kept that Western theme going up.
Yeah, we still need to go.
Yeah, we're gonna be walking history
forever.
from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go to the bird cage, go to the courthouse.
Mhm.
I mean, I've been there. It is a desert town. But my grandmother, she was there in Tombstone when the OK Corral when that shootout happened. And the shootout is quite funny because there is quite a build up to it. I mean, there is definitely hostilities happening in the town between the two groups, between the brothers and the Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. But the shootout lasts for like less than 30 seconds.
Oh, interesting.
And it's kind of, and it wasn't like out in the street. It was kind of like a ways off in an alley. And you can go and watch the recreation of it or the reenactment of it. And it's like, boom. Oh, wow. That's it. But it's the history of the lead up. It's the drama of the building up to
this hostility.
To Wyatt Earp. And then the courthouse is really interesting too. There is a lot of history behind there. You can go there and find a lot of like ghost tours. You could take a lot of ghost tours there. Like the birdcage is haunted, is supposedly. All throughout Arizona, you're going to find these like cowboy towns that they've kind of kept up a little bit. So like there's Bisbee. I lived in Tucson for quite a bit, and so there's a ton of history down there as well that you can kind of go see.
Cool.
But your grandma was in Tombstone. How long did she live in Tombstone then? How long was she there?
So,
your great
they were in Tombstone. She got married very young. She actually married at 14,
which was typical of the time.
Yeah, she wasn't there for very long, and then she married a very mean man named Carr. He was a lot older than her, had a couple kids, but she moves to Yuma, Arizona.
Okay.
Or kind of outside near the Welton area, a little outside Yuma, Arizona. And that's where my dad's family lived for a very long time. My grandparents were there. So we would go to Yuma, and and you can go to, like if you ever seen the movie 3:10 to Yuma.
I love that movie really so much. Yeah. Yes. I love it.
Okay. Well, you can go to, you can go to the fort. I mean, the Yuma prison is still there.
Yeah.
And so you can go to the fort there. And they have a graveyard and stuff, and you can kind of walk around and
so much history, Lisa.
Oh my gosh, that's
you have to do like.
I mean, there's also
Arizona.
Well, there's also there's like Montezuma's Castle and Montezuma's Well, and then there's all kinds of native history there. If you go to like Sedona, it's like, I mean, Sedona Flagstaff.
Sure.
There's a lot of like Native American history there that you could see. I wouldn't say like Phoenix. I don't think I wouldn't give Phoenix like an A+ on preservation.
Yeah.
They've tried, but I wouldn't say that like, they've done a super stellar job on it. But they do have some old buildings there, like the if you're into like mobster history, John Dillinger was murdered outside of the theater in Tucson, and and you can go and see that the theater is still there where he is shot.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's like places. There's places you can go and look around. My hometown, Gilbert, has a little local museum that you can go into and learn a little bit about Gilbert, Arizona.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it sounds like you're a lot better at genealogy than I ever was, because our daughter, we mentioned to her one time that my father believes that we are distantly related to Zachary Taylor, the 12th president.
Okay.
And I don't know if he's ever actually confirmed that. I think he said that he did.
I know.
But
I don't know,
our daughter has latched onto that.
We have to pray to him at night.
We don't have to pray
to Zachary Taylor.
We don't have to pray to him. We have to pray for him and our other passed along relatives to watch over her.
The 12th president. I have to pray to the 12th
so maybe we'll get some tips and tricks from you on genealogy research.
Yeah.
And I can actually prove or disprove that for final one time.
I was gonna say, anytime you need help with that, I just gave a lecture on Tuesday about finding your records.
Oh, okay.
Your genealogy
we
records.
should do Scott. I mean, Scott. I've done mine, but Scott. He claims to have family on the Mayflower.
Yeah, from my mom's side.
Yeah,
from my mom's
and
side.
his mom's maiden name, Violet. There's records of the Violet children doing chores on George Washington's farm. So she's descendant of those violets.
Yeah, according to my grandparents, from what they were told, and their grandparents, I mean, they were homesteaders. They ended up in Montana, and
so I blame
all
Scott
that
for
all
everything
that kind
wrong
of stuff.
With America. It's his ancestors.
So apparently on that side of the family, we go all the way back to. It's not. I don't think it's the Mayflower. It was like one of the ones that came like just afterwards, like probably a couple months afterwards, because there was that one, and then there's ships that kind of kept coming, but yeah, I mean, apparently that's the case, but again, I have not proved or disproved anything, so.
Well, let me tell you, I mean, you will find that some of the things that you learned from like my grandpa, not the one we've been talking about a little bit, but my other grandpa, he would always say that we were related to Davy Crockett. And Geronimo and Anne Frank, because she's Dutch, we're Dutch, so we have to be related to Anne Frank. So some things like that. But when I started doing my genealogy work, I never heard that we were related to anybody on the Mayflower, and we're not. I'm not related to anybody on the Mayflower, but I realized or found out that Osamequin, or Chief Massasoit, he is my 12th great-grandfather.
Oh.
Cool.
And his daughter, so Massasoit his children get English titles. Okay, so the colonists start referring to them as like Princess Anne and Prince Philip.
Okay.
And you might have heard of like Prince Philip's War. So his daughter marries a Starkweather, who is one of the strangers. He's not a pilgrim, but he comes on one of the ships after the Mayflower to Plymouth Colony.
Wow.
And he marries Massasoit's daughter, and that's my ancestors, the Starkweather line. So through the Starkweather line, I'm related to the Chief Massasoit.
There you go.
So that was kind of cool. And when I told my dad, he just was like blown away. He was like, I cannot even believe that.
Cool.
He was absolutely blown away.
That's really, really neat. Well, Lisa, I'm sure we could kind of keep chatting. I feel like I'm falling down a rabbit hole with you right now on this genealogy thing. So I'm going to stop myself so this isn't a 3-hour podcast. But can you tell our listeners and the folks watching on the live stream the best place for people to find you online?
Okay, I am predominantly 3 places. I am on Facebook at Historical USA, but I don't do much over there. But I am on Instagram at historical_USA, as well as TikTok historical_USA. You can follow me there. And then you can follow me here on YouTube at Historical USA. And then I also have a website. I do have a website. It's Historical US. It's just historicalus.com. And I do post, so like when I do long form videos, I will post like a blog post with it.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
That sometimes we'll have like the sources and citations of the research that I used and books that I read and book recommendations. Because I always get people that are asking, okay, well, what do I want to read if I want to learn about this?
That's awesome.
So I will list, the books that I read or and referenced in my video.
Awesome.
On my website.
Yeah, well, I will make sure that I add the links to your YouTube channel, Instagram channel in the description of this video. And for those listening and for those watching, thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast. And please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think that today's topic would interest a friend. Shoot them a text and tell them to look up the Talk with History podcast, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.